The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room falls quiet as Senator J.D. Vance leans into his microphone, eyes fixed on Caroline Levit at the witness table. Miss Levit, he begins with a condescending tone. I see you went to St. Anselm College. Not exactly Harvard Law, is it? I wonder if you're really prepared to weigh in on constitutional issues of this significance. Levit, just 28 and nominated for Deputy White House Counsel, stays calm despite the jab. Camera flashes capture her steady gaze as she responds without blinking. Thank you for your concern, Senator. Perhaps we can focus on the legal matters at hand, rather than where I earned my degrees. Senator Dianne Feinstein, visibly taken aback by Vance's remark, quickly interjects. I think this committee should examine legal qualifications, not the prestige of one's alma mater. What started as a standard confirmation hearing rapidly evolves into a deeper conversation about qualifications, educational elitism, and what it truly means to be an expert in the law. The brief 3-minute exchange unexpectedly triggers a broader reassessment of how legal skill is evaluated in Washington. If you believe competence matters more than credentials, be sure to like and subscribe to follow this compelling journey of overlooked excellence and the risks of underestimating unconventional candidates. Before this exchange, Caroline Levit had carved out a legal career that didn't follow the usual track. After graduating from St. Anselm in New Hampshire, she served as a communications aide in the Trump White House, then joined a top law firm where she quietly gained a reputation for insightful legal work. What most didn't know was that she earned her law degree from Georgetown University at night, while working full-time, graduating in the top 2% of her class. A clerical error had left this detail out of the committee's records. Carolyn doesn't talk much about her academic achievements, says former colleague Robert Chin. She prefers that her arguments be judged on their substance, not the name on her diploma. It's a refreshing perspective in a field often obsessed with pedigree. Senator Vance, on the other hand, often highlights his Yale law degree and presents himself as a champion of working-class interests. Despite his elite background, he's known for pressing nominees hard, especially those from Democratic administrations. Vance approaches these hearings like a prosecutor, explains Senate analyst Maria Hernandez. He looks for weak spots in a nominee's resume and tries to question their authority from there. Their clash was hinted at weeks earlier, when Vance said on a Sunday political show that President Harris was filling legal posts with communications staff, putting messaging ahead of qualifications. What Vance didn't realize was that Levit had authored 3 influential law review articles on executive power published under a pseudonym. She feared her communications background and young age might cause her work to be dismissed. One of those articles had even been cited by Justice Alito in a recent ruling. In preparation for the hearing, Levit had spent a month studying Vance's judicial opinions and writings, identifying key patterns and contradictions in his legal reasoning. She treated this hearing like preparing for the most important argument of her life, recalls her former professor Catherine Washington. She anticipated his skepticism and planned to pivot the conversation to areas where her legal knowledge shines. After a short recess, few expected the hearing to become a showcase of legal sophistication. Vance resumes questioning. Miss Levit, most of your career has been in communications. How does that prepare you to advise the president on constitutional issues? Can you explain your understanding of the unitary executive theory and its limits? The question appears designed to corner her, either to show a lack of depth or force an admission of inexperience. A few staffers glance at each other, anticipating hesitation. Instead, Levit answers calmly. Certainly, Senator. The unitary executive theory, grounded in Article 2's vesting clause, evolved significantly since its resurgence in the 1980s. I find Justice Thomas's opinion in SALA law especially useful in distinguishing removal powers from broader agency independence. She then walks through 3 relevant Supreme Court rulings, referencing exact pages and drawing connections to landmark cases like Marbury v. Madison. Her explanation balances both textualist and functionalist approaches. Senator Durbin leans forward, clearly impressed. Vance's expression tightens slightly as the exchange doesn't go as he had expected. That's a textbook answer, he replies. But how would you apply that theory when advising the president, for instance? In regulating carbon emissions without specific congressional authority, a relevant scenario, Levit replies without pause. We'd begin with Massachusetts v. EPA, which recognized greenhouse gases as pollutants under the Clean Air Act, but any move must also account for the major questions doctrine, recently emphasized in West Virginia v. EPA. She lays out a framework that blends statutory context with precedent, showing a firm grasp of legal nuance and executive responsibility. Vance shifts strategy. Your response seems to reflect a particular ideological perspective. With respect, Senator Levit replies, I've aimed to present various interpretations. My role is to ensure the president fully understands the legal scope and boundaries, not to promote my own views. I'd point to your 2016 Yale Law Journal article, where you made a similar argument about separating analysis from advocacy. The mention of Vance's past work, especially one that slightly contradicts his current position, causes a subtle stir. Senator Whitehouse breaks in. It seems Miss Levit is unusually well-versed in the senator's legal writings. I've reviewed all committee members' perspectives, Levit responds. I believe broad understanding is essential to balanced legal counsel. For the next 40 minutes, Vance dives deeper from the dormant commerce clause to the non-delegation doctrine, trying to test her limits. Each time, Levit responds with relevant cases, scholarly references, and well-reasoned arguments that reflect both academic rigor and real-world awareness. Halfway through, Senator Klobuchar receives a note. Her eyebrows rise before she passes it to Senator Coons. It later turns out to be confirmation of Levit's academic ranking and authorship of the anonymous articles that had shaped recent court decisions. As the questioning continues, the mood shifts. What began as an effort to expose a weak resume now becomes an in-depth, high-level discussion of constitutional law. Vance begins to engage less like an interrogator and more like a curious peer. By the end of his time, many senators, Democrats, and Republicans alike are fully engaged in the conversation. During the next recess, reporters scramble to capture the moment. Legal scholars start posting online, praising the session's intellectual depth. We're witnessing something rare, says legal analyst Jeffrey Torres. What was meant to discredit a nominee has turned into one of the most meaningful hearings on executive power in recent memory. When the session resumes, Senator Klobuchar addresses the confusion. For the record, Miss Levit, could you clarify your legal training? There seems to be a gap in our materials. Of course, Senator, she replies. I earned my J.D. from Georgetown Law's evening program while working full-time, graduating magna cum laude, and serving as a law review editor. The room stirs. Senator Grassley adjusts his glasses and scans his notes, and Klobuchar continues. Are you the author of 3 influential articles on executive authority published under the name Cale Hamilton? Yes, Senator Levit confirms. I used a pseudonym so the arguments would be judged without bias based on my age or communications background. The room's tone changes again. Senators previously preparing critical questions reevaluate their approach. Vance, now informed, returns with a different demeanor. Miss Levit, I owe you an apology, he says. To the room's surprise, my assumptions were unfounded. Your knowledge of constitutional law is exceptional. Thank you, Senator, Levit replies. But this moment shows exactly why diverse backgrounds matter. We often confuse prestige with ability. I hope my story broadens how we define legal readiness. Applause briefly breaks out in the gallery before the chair calls for order. Legal experts weigh in. Harvard professor Daniel Morgenstern tweets, Levit's understanding of the major questions doctrine surpasses most academic commentary I've seen this year. Georgetown releases a statement honoring her achievements. By the afternoon, the hearing has fully shifted. Senators from both sides engaged Levit with serious legal questions, showing her the same respect reserved for appellate judges or legal scholars. The nominee's command of constitutional law has rendered credential concerns irrelevant, notes the Wall Street Journal's legal correspondent Vance. Instead of retreating from his earlier misstep, joins in a high-level exchange on Textualist. Interpretation described by some as the most substantive televised discussion of constitutional law in a confirmation hearing. At the end of his time, he asks for 1 extra minute not for another question, but to commend her performance. While we may differ in interpretation, Miss Levit, your clarity and rigor have reminded us that legal talent can come from anywhere. The committee votes unanimously 21-0 to advance her nomination, a rare bipartisan outcome. Vance's public praise draws widespread media attention. 2 weeks later, the Senate confirms Levit with strong bipartisan support. Her confirmation isn't remembered just for the outcome, but for challenging long-held assumptions about credentials in Washington. In his floor speech, Vance reflects, I questioned her background. I was wrong. This process showed me that legal brilliance isn't confined to elite institutions. Clips of their exchange are used in law schools nationwide, not just for legal content, but as a case study in overcoming bias. Harvard Law Dean Alina Martinez shows the footage to first-year students, saying, excellence in law comes not from where you studied, but how you think and communicate ideas. Applications to evening and part-time programs rise 22% the following year, with many citing Levit as inspiration. At her swearing-in, attended by bipartisan leaders, Levit says, this process became a chance to prove that substance not back expertise. If my story opens doors for others, that may be my most lasting contribution. 3 months later, Levit's legal guidance helps resolve a major separation of powers conflict, praised across the political spectrum. The Washington Post writes, Levit's handling of this issue proves that non-traditional backgrounds can strengthen, not weaken, our institutions. Georgetown Law launches the Caroline Levit Scholarship for evening students, with Senator Vance personally donating. In a joint interview, Vance and Levit reflect on their journey. I used to think elite credentials were essential, Vance admits. Miss Levit proved otherwise. She deserves credit for publicly reconsidering his stance, Levit says. That kind of honesty is rare. Their exchange fuels a nationwide rethink of how legal talent is evaluated. Law firms begin reevaluating their hiring practices. A year later, The American Bar Association reports that high-performing graduates from lesser-known schools match the success of elite law grads, sparking calls for broader reform. A Harvard Conference Levit summarizes her journey. The law should judge ideas by merit, not by who presents them. That principle should guide how we recognize legal talent too. Her story becomes a landmark in reshaping legal culture. If you found this story of substance over status inspiring, don't forget to like and subscribe. Share your own moments of being underestimated or discovering unexpected excellence in the comments.